All right, let's dive into this
Yeah.
this stack of research you've given us on decarbonizing the energy sector.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Big
huge EE topic, right?
Mhm.
Feels like everyone is talking about renewable energy these days, but
Yeah, it does.
these sources paint a much more complex picture.
It is complex. We're not just talking about slapping up some solar panels and calling it a day.
Right.
This deep dive
Yeah.
explores the hurdles, the potential solutions, and even some psychological and cultural barriers to truly decarbonizing the energy sector.
Exactly. And the way you've curated these sources, it looks like we'll be going beyond just electricity generation, which is what most people focus on.
You're right.
Mm.
We need to look at the energy sector as a whole.
Okay.
That means considering how we generate power, yes, but also how different end users, households, transportation, even heavy industries can contribute.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of different technologies and solutions, let's set the stage. The world is getting hotter, and the burning of fossil fuels is the main culprit. This isn't some distant threat anymore.
It's impacting us right now.
Yeah.
One of the reports you shared points out that the warmest years on record have all occurred in the last 2 decades.
Wow.
We're seeing more frequent and intense extreme weather events, from floods and droughts to wildfires.
And it's not just about saving polar bears anymore.
Right.
These events are directly impacting human health, displacing communities and putting a serious strain on economies worldwide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a global crisis that demands a global response. And that's where things get tricky.
Because we do have global efforts in place, like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, but
Yeah.
CO2 emissions are still rising.
Yeah.
One of these sources had a really eye-opening analysis of why these agreements haven't been as effective as hoped.
What stood out to you?
It was this point about the price of emission allowances being so low that it hasn't incentivized real change. Companies haven't felt the economic pressure to actually reduce their emissions.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
It highlights how decarbonization isn't just about technological innovation. It's deeply intertwined with economics and even human psychology.
Right.
We can develop the most amazing clean technologies, but if the economic incentives aren't there, widespread adoption will be slow.
Makes you realize how this deep dive is about so much more than just geeking out over renewable energy tech.
Right.
We're talking about systems change at a massive scale.
Yeah.
But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay.
Let's start with something a bit more concrete. Electricity generation.
All right, so let's talk about everyone's favorite renewable energy.
Okay.
It's awesome, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it comes in a big caveat. Intermittency.
Okay.
The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow.
Right.
So what fills the gap?
And I see that's where our sources start to diverge a bit. There's this debate about switching from coal to natural gas as a necessary stepping stone.
Right. And it's a tricky one.
Okay.
On one hand, natural gas burns cleaner than coal, so it can reduce emissions in the short term. But it's still a fossil fuel. And we need to be very careful about not locking ourselves into a new gas-dependent infrastructure.
Okay. So natural gas might buy us some time, but it's not a long-term solution.
Yeah.
What about technologies like carbon capture and storage?
TCS.
CCS.
Yeah.
The idea of capturing CO2 emissions from power plants and storing them underground sounds promising on the surface.
It does, but as one of these reports digs into, CCS has faced several challenges.
Okay.
It's expensive to implement.
Yeah.
It can significantly reduce the efficiency of power plants.
Right.
And there are concerns about the long-term environmental impact of storing CO2 underground.
What if it leaks?
Exactly.
I get why public acceptance is a big hurdle, too.
Yeah.
Not many people want a CO2 storage site in their backyard.
Right. And then there's the issue of whether those resources could be better spent on developing truly clean energy sources. It's a complex cost-benefit analysis.
Speaking of complex, no conversation about decarbonizing the electricity sector is complete without addressing the elephant in the room.
Ah, yes.
Nuclear power.
Zero emissions on the surface, but fraught with concerns about safety waste disposal.
Right.
And let's not forget the potential for proliferation.
It feels like every potential solution comes with its own set of baggage.
That's the nature of complex systems.
Yeah.
They're always trade-offs, and that's why it's so important to consider all these different angles, weigh the pros and cons, and really understand the nuances of each approach.
And to make it even more nuanced, These sources are urging us not to forget about heat.
Yes.
It's often overlooked in the decarbonization discussion, but it represents a huge portion of our energy demand, especially in those colder climates.
And absolutely. And one of the sources dives into a really fascinating concept, district heating networks,
Oh,
or
yeah.
DHNs.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What are DHNs and how do they fit into this whole decarbonization puzzle?
Think of a DHN like a giant central heating system for a whole neighborhood or even a city.
Oh, okay.
They can be much more efficient than individual heating systems because they can leverage larger scale energy sources and minimize heat loss.
That's a pretty cool concept.
Yeah.
But what's powering those central sources?
Right.
If it's fossil fuels,
Right.
then we're just shifting the emissions problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
A lot of existing DHNs rely on fossil fuels, and that's a big challenge we need to address.
Yeah.
But these sources highlight some exciting possibilities for transitioning them to cleaner sources.
Okay.
One is waste-to-energy CHP plants.
CHP.
Yeah.
Let me guess, that stands for combined heat and power.
You got it. CHP plants are super efficient because they capture the heat that's generated as a byproduct of electricity production and use it for heating buildings or industrial processes.
Yeah.
And using waste materials as the fuel source is a double win. It diverts waste from landfills and reduces our reliance on fossil fuels.
That's clever. What other options are on the table for decarbonizing heat?
Another promising solution is solar thermal energy. Instead of using photovoltaic panels to generate electricity, solar thermal systems directly capture heat from the sun.
So picture those giant mirrors focusing sunlight to heat water or generate steam.
Exactly. And that heat can then be used for district heating, industrial processes, or even desalination.
We keep bumping into hydrogen as a potential solution. Is it a contender in the heat game as well?
It definitely has the potential.
Okay.
Remember, green hydrogen produced using renewable energy can be used as a clean fuel for heating. But as we discussed earlier, the cost of producing green hydrogen is still a big barrier. And then there's the whole issue of storage and transportation.
Right. Hydrogen is notoriously tricky to handle.
Yeah.
It feels like every time we identify a promising solution, we run into a new set of challenges.
That's often the case with complex systems, but it's also an opportunity for innovation and creativity.
Okay, so we've explored the complexities of decarbonizing electricity generation and heat. Now let's talk about another beast. Breaking our global dependence on petroleum products.
Okay.
One of these sources compared it to a bad relationship that we know we need to get out of, but breaking up is hard to do.
That's such an apt analogy. Petroleum products are so ingrained in our lives.
It really is.
From the gasoline in our cars to the plastics we use every day.
Yeah.
Finding sustainable replacements for all those applications is a monumental task.
So where do we even begin? Biofuels seem to be one option.
Right.
But these sources highlight some potential pitfalls.
Right. Biofuels made from plants or other organic matter have the potential to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
But if they're not produced sustainably, they can lead to deforestation, compete with food crops,
Right.
and even have higher emissions than fossil fuels in some cases.
It's like trying to solve one problem only to create a whole new set of problems.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we need to think holistically and consider the entire life cycle of any fuel or material we use.
What about those other contenders, synthetic fuels and hydrogen? Could they be the answer to our petroleum woes?
They are definitely being explored as long-term solutions, but they face their own set of hurdles.
Okay.
Producing synthetic fuels, which are essentially hydrocarbons created from carbon dioxide and hydrogen,
Yeah.
requires a lot of energy. And if that energy comes from fossil fuels, it defeats the purpose.
So we're back to needing abundant, affordable, clean energy to make these solutions viable.
Exactly. And even if we can crack the production challenges, we still need to address those pesky issues of storage and transportation, especially for hydrogen.
It's amazing how interconnected all these challenges are.
Yeah.
We can't just focus on one sector or one technology in isolation. We need to consider the entire system and how different pieces fit together.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of this deep dive, the role of different end-use sectors.
Okay.
It's not just about how we generate energy, it's about how we use it in our homes, businesses, and transportation systems.
So everyone has a role to play in this transition, not just the big energy companies.
Exactly. There's so much we can do as individuals and communities to reduce our energy consumption and make smarter choices.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of those end-use sectors.
Yeah.
Let's start with households and public buildings.
Okay.
What kind of changes can make a real difference there?
The sources emphasize the importance of energy efficiency.
Okay.
Simple things like better insulation, more efficient appliances, and even just changing our behavior can have a significant cumulative impact.
It's not always about fancy new technology, but about making smart choices in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And that's where things get interesting. There's a psychological and behavioral component here. How do we encourage people to adopt these energy-saving measures?
That raises a lot of questions. What are the most effective ways to communicate the benefits of energy efficiency? How do we overcome cost barriers for low-income households? How do we make energy efficiency not just a good idea, but the easy and desirable choice?
Those are all great questions, and they highlight how decarbonization isn't just a technological challenge, it's a social and cultural challenge as well.
All right, so we've tackled energy efficiency in buildings. What about that other big energy hog, transportation? Electrifying cars and trucks seems to be the go-to solution, but even that comes with caveats.
One of the reports points out that electrifying transportation only truly reduces emissions if the electricity powering those vehicles comes from clean sources.
Right.
If we're just plugging our electric cars into a grid that's still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, we're not really solving the problem.
So we're back to the importance of decarbonizing the electricity sector. It all circles back. But what about those hard-to-decarbonize sectors, like aviation and shipping? Those seem like real head-scratchers.
They are. Electrifying airplanes and large ships is still largely unfeasible with current technology.
Yeah.
Batteries are just too heavy and don't have the energy density needed for long-haul flights or voyages. Some of the sources suggest that sustainable biofuels or synthetic fuels could be part of the solution. But those come with their own set of challenges, as we discussed earlier. They are like electrifying airplanes and large ships is still largely unfeasible with current technology. Batteries are just too heavy and don't have the energy density needed for long-haul flights or voyages. Some of the sources suggest that sustainable biofuels or synthetic fuels could be part of the solution, but those come with their own set of challenges, as we discussed earlier.
It feels like we keep running into these roadblocks. Is there any hope for decarbonizing these really tough sectors?
There are some intriguing ideas emerging. One of the sources dives into the potential of hydrogen-powered aircraft. While still in the early stages of development, there are some promising advancements in fuel cell technology and lightweight hydrogen storage systems.
So maybe hydrogen, despite its challenges, could play a key role in the future of transportation.
It has the potential, but it will require significant investment in research and development as well as supportive policies to scale up production and infrastructure.
Okay, we've covered households, transportation. What about the industrial sector? Those processes are notoriously energy intensive and difficult to decarbonize. What do our sources have to say about that?
You're right. Industries like steel, cement, and chemicals rely on extremely high temperatures and often use fossil fuels as both an energy source and a feedstock. Decarbonizing these processes isn't just about swapping out a coal-fired furnace for an electric one. It often requires completely rethinking the process itself.
That sounds daunting. What are some of the approaches being explored?
One key concept that comes up repeatedly is process integration. It's about finding ways to make industrial processes more efficient by cleverly using waste heat and materials. For example, instead of venting heat from one process into the atmosphere, it could be captured and used to power another process that requires heat.
So it's about finding those symbiotic relationships between different processes and squeezing more value out of the resources they're already using.
Exactly. And as one of the reports points out, this isn't just about being environmentally responsible. It can actually save companies a lot of money.
That's the kind of win-win scenario we need. Are there other promising avenues for decarbonizing heavy industries?
Electrification is definitely a big one. For processes that require heat, electric arc furnaces or induction heating can replace fossil fuel-fired systems. And for chemical processes, there's growing interest in using green hydrogen as a feedstock, potentially replacing fossil fuels.
But again, we run into those cost and scalability challenges with green hydrogen.
Yeah.
Feels like we need some major breakthroughs in clean energy technology to really crack this nut.
It's true that we need continued innovation in areas like renewable energy generation, energy storage, and hydrogen production. But these sources also highlight the importance of something that doesn't always get enough attention: policy.
Okay, let's talk policy. What kind of policy measures can help drive the decarbonization of the energy sector?
A global carbon tax is often cited as the most effective way to incentivize rapid change. The idea is to put a price on carbon emissions, making fossil fuels more expensive, and leveling the playing field for clean energy alternatives.
But as we touched on earlier, a carbon tax can be controversial. Some argue that it disproportionately impacts low-income households who spend a larger portion of their income on energy.
That's a valid concern, and it's why it's crucial to design carbon pricing mechanisms in a way that's socially just. One approach is to use the revenue generated from a carbon tax to provide rebates or tax credits to low-income households, offsetting the increased energy costs.
So it's not just about putting a price on carbon, it's about what you do with that revenue.
Exactly. And there are other policy measures that can complement carbon pricing. One is reforming existing emissions trading schemes, or ETSs. Remember how we talked about the low price of emission allowances not being effective? Well, the idea is to make these schemes more robust by setting stricter caps on emissions and ensuring that the price of allowances accurately reflects the true cost of carbon pollution.
It sounds like there's a whole toolbox of policy options available. The challenge is finding the right combination and implementing them effectively.
And that requires political will. These sources emphasize the importance of sustained long-term commitment from governments around the world. We need clear policies, ambitious targets, and consistent investment in clean energy innovation.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge. We've unpacked so many complex issues in this deep dive, and it can be a bit dizzying.
It is a lot to take in. But it's also important to remember that we're not starting from scratch. There's been incredible progress in clean energy technology over the past few decades. Solar and wind power are now cheaper than fossil fuels in many parts of the world. Electric vehicles are rapidly gaining market share, and innovation continues to accelerate.
You're right, there are reasons to be optimistic.
There are, and it's crucial to focus on those positive developments and celebrate the progress we've made. Because ultimately, this isn't just about reducing emissions, it's about creating a better future.
A future with cleaner air, healthier communities, and a more sustainable and resilient energy system.
Exactly. And that's a future worth fighting for.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to ponder as they go about their day? What's the one thought you want to leave them with?
I think the most important message is that while the challenge of decarbonizing the energy sector is immense, it's not insurmountable. It requires collective action from governments and businesses to communities and individuals. Each one of us has a role to play. By staying informed, making conscious choices, and advocating for the right policies, we can create the kind of future we want for ourselves and generations to come.
That's a powerful message, and it's a great reminder that we're not just passive observers in this transition, we're active participants.
Exactly. And the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on. A huge thanks to you for sharing your expertise and insights, and to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.